Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The president's budget proposal sets the stage, but much of the action is happening elsewhere on Capitol Hill. We begin with a look at how lawmakers are handling overlapping funding challenges and what might come next with Mitchell Miller, Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. Mitchell, thanks so much for joining me.
You bet.
All right, not like there's not a lot of news, even though it's recess. The president's budget for 2027 hit the Hill on Friday. Give us a quick walk through the headlines.
Well, lawmakers and their staff members are poring over this right now, and it is a huge proposed budget, especially, as you know, in connection with defense. $1.5 trillion proposed by the president. This is the largest by far in decades, going all the way back to the Reagan administration. And what's interesting about it is that this is actually more than was proposed for last year's budget, which a lot of people thought that was a huge defense budget. And then, of course, there's still the pending matter of whether or not the president is going to seek up to $200 billion in additional funding in connection with Iran. So a lot of things will revolve, of course, around this Pentagon request. And a lot of this document came together really from Budget Director Russ Vought. So some people are a little bit surprised that it is high as it is because he is largely a budget hawk, but it does reflect, as always, the proposals, the priorities, I should say, of the president, that this is going to be a big push for more enforcement in connection with enforcement as well, and then a 10% cut for many of the domestic programs. That includes a lot of the energy renewal programs, housing programs, and of course you can bet that Democrats are going to push, and they already have said they are going to push really hard against these type of cuts. And then also related to cuts, there's going to be pressure from conservative Republicans, particularly in the House, to offset this large amount of spending on the defense side, on the domestic side. So you can see that there's potentially a huge clash here coming in connection with Congress, as if we haven't had enough of one already.
Right. That 10% reduction to the domestic side is not going to be nearly enough by itself to cover that defense increase.
No, not by a long shot. So I think you're going to see a lot of jockeying around those figures in connection with the defense increase. I just don't think that lawmakers, even the biggest defense hawks, are going to go fully behind that, because there's also increases in other areas. There's a 13% increase in the Department of Justice in connection with cracking down on crime. So there are a lot of other increases that reflect, of course, the president's priorities. But the president also, of course, came under some scrutiny last week because that video came out where he said we can't really cover things like daycare, Medicare, and Medicaid. And of course, Democrats immediately jumped on that and said, wait a second, we can fund all this money for defense, but we can't fund these domestic programs. And so you are going to see a real big battle over that.
Mitchell, this budget comes on top of lots of other resourcing questions, like the Department of Homeland Security, which is still in a funding standoff. What is going on there?
Well, this is a dizzying game of ping pong within the Republican Party, as you know. The fact that the Senate came back early last week and actually essentially dismissed the House budget that had been passed after the Senate originally passed its bill, and then came back to what the Senate wanted initially, which is, of course, to fund everything within DHS except for immigration enforcement and border patrol. And now it's kind of in a stuck position, if you will, because the House has indicated they are not going to come back this week. A lot of grumbling from House conservatives, as well as some more moderate Republicans last week, that they just don't want to be forced to deal with this Senate bill. They don't think that it reflects a lot of the things that they have been pushing for really hard, which of course is ICE enforcement and border patrol money. So I think we're going to be in a suspended animation during this week until they get back the following Monday, and then we'll see when the rubber hits the road what they are actually going to do. Now, of course, the president eased some of the pain potentially with that announcement last week that he's going to fund all of DHS, which is unprecedented that the White House would actually say that it is going to fund an agency that funds so many different programs on its own. Now, of course, it has all the additional funding from the big, beautiful bill that was passed last year, but that only goes so far. And I think you're going to get into the next week a real battle over how is budget reconciliation going to take place.
I'm speaking with Mitchell Miller. He's Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. Well, Mitchell, let's move to the reconciliation issue. It is the most Rube Goldberg approach I can think of to fund the federal government. But there's been a lot of talk about what might be in it, how it might proceed, one or two. What are you hearing about those plans?
Right. There's actually a possibility that there could be two reconciliation bills. So one of them would be the one that the House conservatives want initially. And in fact, that's why they are not moving on the overall DHS bill, because they want assurances that there will be more money for ICE enforcement, that there will be more money for the Border Patrol. And so they actually argue that that should be done first. That is not the way the Senate wants it done. So there's already a battle right there over whether or not what the timing of that is going to be. And then there has even been talk of another reconciliation bill that House Speaker Mike Johnson floated in a meeting with lawmakers last week on the Republican side, which would include kind of a grab bag of all these different priorities that House Republicans and other Republicans have in connection with national voter ID, that $200 billion that I mentioned in connection with the Pentagon, and a variety of other ideas that they have. There is a lot of skepticism, frankly, that that second one will take place. But there's no doubt that the House Republicans are going to hold pretty firm on this idea that they are going to get some type of reconciliation bill moving forward. So that's kind of where we are right now.
There's just not that many congressional work days between now and the midterms. Is there even a chance that they could get all of that done?
No, and that's why I think there's so much skepticism about a second reconciliation bill. There just isn't time. And in fact, even the first reconciliation bill, there are a lot of Republicans as well as many Democrats that are skeptical that that can take place. So yeah, you're right. Even though the president has given them a deadline and said, look, we have to fund DHS by June 1st. With all these breaks and days off, and then with the midterms, as you mentioned, with all the time off that lawmakers are going to have for campaigning, there just isn't a lot of work days legislatively that this is happening. And then the fact that the Senate came back early last week and had this early morning session, which is very rare, at like 7 in the morning, and then the House just kind of thumbed its nose and said, no, we'll deal with it when we come back on the 13th of April, that just shows you that all these days just get kind of squeezed out. And before you know it, we're well into the summer, and then we're into the fall campaign season. So you're right. There isn't a lot of time to get all of this done.
Mitchell, when you think about all the things we're talking about here, a budget proposal that's already months late, an entire agency that's not funded, a massive conversation about reconciliation, what implications do you see for a normal budget process? Maybe we haven't had a normal budget process in a long time, but we're supposed to have one. What's the prognosis?
Right. I think there is really a lot of worrying, frankly, here, especially among the longtime appropriators on the Senate side, as well as on the House side, that in many ways the appropriations process is broken. If you have one party, say in this case, the Republicans, just demanding that we are only going to take this on our own, that we are only going to do ICE and we are only going to do border protection, and that's our priority. And then you shut out the Democrats in any form of appropriating for those agencies. And then in turn, if you have the Democrats, if they come into power and do the same thing, now, of course, there was limited budget reconciliation under the Biden administration, but that was actually after the money had been all appropriated. And then they wanted to add money, for example, for IRS upgrades and enforcement. So what you have is the potential for an appropriations process that is really broken down into this highly partisan situation where each party just decides, oh, well, we only want to fund these agencies, or we only want to fund these other agencies. And I think there is a big danger there as we move forward, that while it can be done, periodically, budget reconciliation was not something that was just considered something to do very regularly. It was almost esoteric at one point, where they would go to the parliamentarian and ask all these questions. And now I think it's becoming a little bit too de rigueur, if you will. It's becoming too regular here on the Hill. And that it really worries a lot of people who generally those people who are still left, who want to reach across the aisle and do things traditionally, as you say, to actually take a budget, work across the table and see what we can improve on, and then agree overall, this is what we think as Republicans and Democrats is best for the country.
Mitchell Miller is Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. Mitchell, it sounds like we're in for a white knuckle ride.
We are, so hang on.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.